reflections. In this hour, in our weird and wonderful feature, we look at the history and the evolution of mirrors. We look at them every day, first thing in the morning. In shop windows, we walk by, on our phones, when we take selfies. But have you ever stopped to wonder where mirrors come from? Who first decided to capture a reflection? And how did something as simple as a polished surface evolve into a tool for science, for fashion, and even space exploration? From ancient times, this everyday object has a history as fascinating as the images it reflects. But mirrors don't just show us our faces. They've shaped art, literature, and even how we see ourselves. Joining me to delve into the history and evolution of this object is Vasilios Cocotos, a master candidate in optical physics at Wits University, and is here with me in the studio. And I hope that you can join us as we have this conversation. Call us on 011-883-0702. I'm available on X. My X handle is at Aubrey, but I'm also available on the 702 WhatsApp line. The number there is 072-702-1702. When was for the first time you were aware of your reflection? Yeah, I mean, you've seen. By the way, good evening to you, Vasilios. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Glad to be here. I've spent the last 2 days listening to Frasier and Good Morning Vietnam in preparation.
Oh yeah.
So hopefully it should prove useful.
We're not that brutal. Trust me, we're not that brutal. But I've watched animals watch their own reflections in a mirror. Mm-hmm. I've watched babies watch their own reflections in a mirror. And something happens the moment somebody for the first time understands that there is the image that is in the mirror, or the image that is reflected by the mirror, and them. Something happens. I'm not sure what the cognitive process is there. Maybe you've had time to think about that. But I imagine that the first time that a human being or an animal ever had that experience with their own reflection was maybe when they went to go and drink some water on a quiet lake or something like that. Tell us about the evolution of the mirror.
Well, it's actually very interesting that you point that out, because you're 100% correct. I mean, The first time any sort of mirror, so to speak, existed was probably about 4 billion years ago, when water started to appear on Earth itself and there was nothing actually around to see its own reflection. But then, as you say, like, these puddles of water came to have life look back at them. And some things are cognizant of the fact that the thing looking back at them is themselves, and more often than not, it's actually not. In fact, the majority of animals don't even recognize that the reflection they're looking at is themselves, and most of them just see it as a different animal, essentially, like another one of themselves. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, there are only 4 animals in the whole animal kingdom, mammals specifically, that are cognizant of the fact that what the reflection is themselves. And I think that's your corvids, like magpies and stuff like that, and elephants and dolphins, and then us. But it's truly a fascinating experience to be able to even make that distinction. I mean,
that's actually quite a big distinction.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's actually quite a big cognitive jump to understand that what I'm looking at is a reflection of me, mm-hmm. right? And I can imagine that the process over time that we've gone through to understanding that I'm looking at a reflection of myself, and maybe you can talk to that, is a process that took time for us as a species to actually come to terms with. And I imagine that's probably why the mirror is such a mysterious thing.
Absolutely.
You think about it, yeah?
No, absolutely. I mean, there's no, it's no mistake that a mirror has been a massive part of human culture and has had, as you've said, these mystical properties that people associate with it since essentially the first one ever existed. I mean, kind of 6,000 years ago, when the first formal quote-unquote mirrors started existing, I mean, they almost got put into spiritual practices and stuff immediately, where people believed that they could use them to see the future, or to like look at themselves and to create some sort of distinction between, the thing looking back at you is yourself, and that distinguish them from other people of the like city and so on and so forth. But I mean, it is this inherent fact that you're looking at yourself has kind of led on to have a lot of like cultural beliefs associated with it over the years. I mean,
give us a call on 011-883-0702 as I speak to Vasilios Cocotos. He's a master's candidate at the University of Wits University on optical physics. We're talking about the mirror, yeah? And we'll talk about the science behind it. We'll talk about the history behind it. But I'll tell you what really fascinates me. And it's a story I've told my listeners many, many, many a time. And I suppose it really lends itself to the conversation about the mystery around mirrors. Many, many years ago, I was in a very, very bad space in my life. Very, very bad space in my life. And I'm not sure if it was because I was inebriated. No. But I remember walking into my bedroom and I was looking at the mirror that reflected the whole bedroom. Everything in the room I could see in the reflection, except myself. Yes, except myself. And I walked around, touched the mirror, and you've probably seen it in movies, how you'll touch the mirror and it almost sticks to your finger.
Mm-hmm.
I had that kind of sensation as well. And I suppose that's the mystery that we have felt, maybe even thought about.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why the mirror sort of always lends itself to all sorts of mystical and cultural and religious sort of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
There are healers who heal by the mirror. The mirror is always said to be a reflector of things that have happened in the past, but can also help you see things that are yet to be. And I want to go into that conversation, and I want to invite our listeners to be part of that conversation, as we obviously going to look at the science of it, the factuality of it all. But Ade in Centurion says, good evening, bro. Oops, your guest and the team. Oh, wow. What a fascinating topic. Let's go. Shout out from Centurion. Indeed. Thank you very much, Ade. But tell us about that evolution. Mirrors have had different, I don't know, they've looked different over time. There's been the glass mirror. There's been the metal. Talk to us about that.
So, as we alluded to earlier, the first kind of mirror was just something that reflected light that was shone on it, right? And what that then evolved into was people in Anatolia, which is now modern day Turkey, in about 6000 BC, basically taking some stone, namely like obsidian stone, and polishing it. And that meant that they could kind of hold it up and the light would strike it and they would see their reflection in it. And then that kind of started to become more complicated over time, where a couple thousand years later, with the kind of development of metallurgy, people in like Egypt and Mesopotamia, which is modern day Iraq, realized that again you can take metal, which is used for many, many other things, like your farming equipment, your weaponry, etc., and you could make it shiny by means of like polishing it.
Yeah.
And again, you can just hold that up to yourself,
yeah.
And then again you can just use that as a reflective surface. But I mean, again, obviously this is not the most ideal way of doing things. This isn't what these metals are most useful for. So as many, many years progressed, people eventually swapped out the the standard copper metal that they were using originally for different types of metal that were more shiny and that they were getting more comfortable with over time. So that then evolved into like your bronze and your silver by means of like the Romans and the Greeks and your Indians and your Chinese. And then that evolved into people in the Renaissance effectively taking that metal and realizing that the metal itself is quite bad to use as a reflecting surface, because if you leave it out in the sun too long, or you expose it to different elements precisely, it will degrade, and that reduces the quality of the reflection, and you have to sit there and polish it all the time, and It's a whole big story. So what they realize is that you can basically just take a piece of glass, which is transparent, and you can stick it on top of that metal, basically. And what that means is that you get the reflective property of the metal whilst not having it degrade as easily or as fast, and so you can maintain it for a lot longer. And prior to this, kind of people didn't really worry too much about glass because it was quite difficult to manufacture and make flat and absent of like aberrations and distortions and so on and so forth. But the development of technology then led to the development of the mirror itself, and the utility of, like, again, putting a glass plate and then the metal behind it. But this kind of, it's a very interesting thing. The evolution of the mirror is basically an evolution of civilization and the societies that kind of add on to it, as one would say. Because following this development in the Renaissance, there kind of led to a whole explosion in like glasswork and I mean, as you've seen, you know, there are these paintings, these like stained glass things, these things that are like you can use glass for just about anything, and you see it, this mass explosion of it during the Renaissance. And what that meant was that there were entire cities dedicated to the production of glass and the maintaining of it and the keeping of the secrets and so on and so forth. And to the extent that there were entire guilds that existed following the Renaissance that entirely existed to make sure that people just produced glass, pretty much.
I want to ask you this question, and I want to take a call.
Sure.
You said something very interesting that says mirrors and their evolution in society, in human civilization, in many ways reflect our technological advancement.
Mm-hmm.
I want to add and hear your thoughts about this and say they also reflect our fascination with consciousness.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And awareness,
Yep.
right? And maybe that's why mirrors have such an important role in the psyche of all societies. It's always been considered the instrument of vanity in many cases, in many instruments. In many instances. Clement Maboy says, please remind me why we were told not to show babies a mirror. That was over 64 years ago. Yeah, I remember being told this. I want to take some calls as you think about that question.
Sure.
By the way, give us a call and let us know about some of the superstitions that are associated with mirrors in your culture. What sort of conversations do you have about mirrors? What does a mirror represent in your space, amongst your people? As Clement has just written to us now, that there are people who believe that we should never show a baby, particularly, its own reflection on the mirror. I know that for sure. I know that story myself. But give me a call. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Janine is in Johannesburg. You want to put on your ears? You got your ears on. Let's go and speak to Janine in Joburg. Hi, Janine.
Hey, Janine.
Hi, Aubrey. I hope you're well.
I'm very well.
Aubrey, yeah, I think it's a fascinating discussion.
It's my Janine.
Yes.
Yes.
You're old Janine.
I recognize your voice instantly. How you doing, Janine?
That's great. I'm doing well, thanks, Aubrey.
I haven't heard from you in such a long time.
I know, and it's just suddenly that I've got the radio on, and I just found the whole mirror thing fascinating. And you've just said the very words, the sort of connection with consciousness and awareness is what I said since I'm saying now. Just basically that, those of us in coaching and counseling and that kind of thing often use the concept of being a mirror for the other person who's on a journey of self-discovery and wanting to look at themselves and become aware.
Yeah.
And as a mirror, you actually mentioned that often there's kind of superstition and mystique around using mirrors to reflect the past or to reflect the future, which I think is another whole amazing angle. But we use it also just to reflect right now who you are in this moment back to yourself. So that it's like saying, if I can be a clear mirror for you, I'm witnessing your experience, I'm allowing you to be fully yourself, and I'm reflecting you back to yourself so you can see yourself
Yes.
from an objective mirror. In other words, a mirror that's not dirty and not full of my own unconscious bias and all kinds of stuff
Yes.
that I bring into the process that kind of contaminates your journey. So if I'm a good counselor or coach, then I am a clear mirror that really reflects back so that you can become more aware of what's really going on for you as you talk, as you process your stuff, and you have me witnessing as your mirror. So I love the whole idea of mirror and consciousness and all of that sort of
Mirror, mirror on the wall. Listen, Janine, so good to hear your voice, man. We need to get together. We need to get you back behind the mic sometime soon. We've got a lot to talk
I
about.
don't know about that. But anyway, that's great. Aubrey, nice to just hear from you again and hear you. And I'd love the thoughts of your guy, because I think technically the evolution is fabulous. But on top of it, like, what did you have to say about, you know, the whole idea of
Yes.
a mirror being this thing about discovering yourself, or the animal discovering itself, and only 4 of us, and I'm not sure that we're one of the 4 civilized ones, but anyway.
Janine and
Only 4
Joburg,
of
thanks
us
very
have
much.
sort of-
Thank you very much. Janine is a very good friend of mine, an amazing personal coach. And it's beautiful how she's picked up on the conversation around the mirror and how that very same idea is used in the coaching process. Your thoughts?
I mean, what she said is completely accurate, right? I mean, these mirrors, as much as they are just objects that reflect the light you shine on them, they have carried with them the superstitions and beliefs of all the cultures that they've traveled through, right? And I mean, these superstitions exist to the modern day, and I mean, the metaphors that come with them also are carried through to the other modern day, as Jean mentioned. As much as it's a physical object that just does what it does, we add on our own beliefs to it, and those beliefs are shaped by the cultures and civilizations and stuff that we exist in, and kind of we now have these beliefs associated with them that may not necessarily have ever been true, but that we still believe wholeheartedly rather, just because of the fact that it's a, as you said, like mystical, somewhat strange thing. Which
I find it fascinating that the less blemish the mirror has, the more perfect the image, right?
Absolutely.
So, and I love the way that Janine says it, that the less of my own preconceived ideas as a coach, the less of my own prejudices, the more I'm able to reflect the person I'm coaching in a more authentic and more honest way. And that helps that person to see themselves more as who they are when I step out of the picture and take away the blemish, as it were, on the mirror. Dr. Phil on the WhatsApp line says, Ops, evening to you and your learned guest. Images are a lie, he says.
Okay.
They don't show emotions, thoughts, backgrounds, pains, sadness, intentions, and pain, I suppose, is what Dr. Phil is saying. Interesting. What do you say to that?
I mean, I'll tell you from personal experience that there have been many times after a night out where I've looked myself in the mirror and I've seen pain, and that's a joke. That's not sorry if it was a legitimate, like, massive, serious question. Apologies for that, but no, I mean, it's completely accurate. As you said, it's just a reflection. It's just an image, and whatever you put in front of it, it will show you back. At the end of the day, it's just the light that's coming from you or whatever you put in front of it that's being spit out back at you in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And again, whatever distortions are in the mirror will become, it will show you in the reflection.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Let's talk to Mariah in Rivonia. Hi, Mariah.
Sorry to inundate you, Aubrey. But exactly on that point, when you hear of people who suffer from anorexia, in other words, they are extremely thin and they think themselves fat, they will look at themselves in the mirror. They don't see a skeletal or a skeletal person looking back at them. They will see a fat person. So, in other words, to me, a mirror is exactly what you've just said right now. It's what you project onto it. It's not always about the true reflection. to an outsider, standing with that person, they'll say, "Can you see there's this skeletal person?" The person looking at the mirror will say, "No, I'm fat. Can't you see that I'm fat?"
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, how powerful is the mind in terms of that reality, which is the reality of the mirror? Anyway, just an interesting question. Thank you.
Interesting that you point out that, I mean, Dr. Phil has just said that the mirror tells us a lie because it doesn't show you the pain. It doesn't show you the other stuff. But your statement, and maybe Janine's statement before you, seems to be saying something totally different, in that whatever you project onto the mirror, even in terms of the interpretations of reality that you have, is what you will see. So the person who is anorexic, or the person who suffers from anorexia, psychologically still has an image of themselves as being overweight. But
exactly.
But the reality is that they are skeletal, and so maybe the mirror is just that, which is perhaps part of the mystery of the mirror, that it shows you exactly what's going on with you and in you.
What you want to see, basically.
Yeah. Mariah in Rivonia, much appreciated. What do you think of that? I want to tell you a story about why babies in my culture were not allowed to see the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, to comment on Mariah's statement, I mind you, I'm not an expert in these matters in any way, shape, or form. But I mean, as far as I know, a mirror shows what it shows. The way that you interpret it is more of a psychological experience more than anything else. A mirror will just, at least a standard mirror that we all have in our homes, whatever you put in front of it, it will reflect back at you. But again, the way that people interpret what that reflection is another matter entirely. It's almost to say that there are kind of three levels of it. You put something in front of the mirror, that image goes to the mirror spits out an image back to you, and then you process that image. So whatever, it will always do the first two steps perfectly, no matter what you put in front of it. But then the last step depends on the individual looking back, I suppose.
Right. And I imagine at a physical level, at a purely scientific physical level, the mirror can be manipulated depending on the thickness of the glass.
Yep.
So you can make the image look bigger, thinner, fatter, whatever, at a purely physical level. Mm-hmm. And the fascinating part is that that's what the mind can also do.
Absolutely.
Right? It can make the image other things. It can make you see the future and the past and all sorts of different things out there. Let me take a call. By the way, maybe let me invite our listeners to tell us why babies are prohibited in some cultures to be reflected in the mirror. Give us a call. Love to take your calls on that. France is in Rivonia. Hi, France.
Obs, good evening. So when we grew up in black families, and to this day, there was always this thing that if there's a funeral in the house, and in the family, all the mirrors need to be covered up with like a blanket or whatsoever.
Yes.
You know, and the superstition still persists to this day, but for me, it's still a mystery because I still don't know really the true reasons behind it, right, as to why. But what I've figured out, towards Janine's point, is that if you're in a store and you're buying a pair of pants, before you even look into the mirror, you can already see yourself in that garment. You can already match it to how, you want to wear it with that vest or with that top or with that jacket. And so the mirror only then reflects your opinion in relation to how the things of yourself.
So it becomes a confirmation or a negation of the image that you already have in your own minds.
100%. So it's a confirmation bias of your own thoughts.
Wow.
And so it content.
I want to go home. I want to go home right now. This conversation's starting to get scary. but that is so powerful that even when you go and buy your jeans, you already have a particular image in your mind as to how you will look, and so the mirror either confirms that or it negates that.
100%. So you're carrying the mirror with you 24/7. The mirror only then just conscientizes you to have a reflective opinion of that which you do not necessarily think needs to be validated by yourself. But the weird thing is, it's still you that confirms that thought.
What did you hear amongst the elders about why babies, for example, are not supposed to be shown a mirror?
So the babies one, I used to sort of believe until I held my own kids in front of the mirror and I saw how much they love it, and then I just sort of like unlearned that superstition, and I said, this one I'm putting aside. This actually sort of like, I've got a different narrative about it, especially now that I think I'm a little bit older. So I'm learning a lot of the superstitions that we just indoctrinated into without any sort of logical meaning behind them. But initially it was a matter that you're going to go squint. They were saying if you put a baby in front of a mirror, their eyes will squint.
Yep. I remember that too. So Franz, I'm going to tell you my thoughts and what I've heard and how I sort of put the dots together. If you stay tuned, you'll hear it.
I appreciate that.
Franz in Rivonia. Anne is in Sandton. Hi, Anne.
Hello, good evening.
Yes, go ahead.
I once mirrored my entire lounge.
Yes.
I love mirrors. I have mirrors even today in every room of my house because I feel that mirrors reflect light.
Yes.
And the light they give off gives me energy.
Yeah, absolutely, Anne. Do you have other images on your walls, perhaps paintings, that sort of thing?
I do.
Okay.
I do have a lot, but the mirrors are precious to me. I have a mirror in every room of my house. My bathroom has 2 very big mirrors.
Yes.
My lounge has mirrors. I have mirrors everywhere in my house because for me, they reflect light. They reflect energy. They give back energy to me.
And for me, it sounds like you've got a very good self-esteem then, Anne, because I usually find that people that are not averse to mirrors have a very strong sense of who they are and are not necessarily turned off by what they see reflected, particularly if it's an image of themselves by the mirror. So when people...
I think... sorry to interrupt. I do believe that.
Yeah.
When I do look at a selfie of myself on the phone, I'm not averse to seeing the actual, sometimes horrible image of myself as I'm getting older. But I will never, ever be averse to having a mirror all around me.
Yeah.
Because it gives off light, it gives off energy.
Indeed.
It reflects the sun, it reflects the moonlight, it reflects the shadows that the dark clouds sometimes,
It's a reflection of reality in many ways, yeah?
Absolutely, yes.
And in Sandton, thanks very much for your call. Ignatius says, Brob's evening. Roto here from Alex. We were raised to cover the mirror every time when it rains, especially when there's lightnings. So they said it attracts lightning. Even we still do exactly that, even at this point. Let me take one more call from Ohotle in Centurion, making a second appearance this evening. Good evening to you, Ohotle.
Hi, good evening, Aubrey.
Yeah, go for it.
We were talking about something else and you're talking about the mirror. The reality is that mirrors are a portal, right? And the mirrors are a portal to your soul. Sometimes we try to convince our brains, oh, by the way, I'm a life coach, a neuro-linguistic practitioner, a negative emotional therapist. And we don't understand that 90% of our brains is controlled by two different hemispheres of brains. I'd want to say that mirrors are a portal, and the reason that we are not showing children, that we're taught not to show children mirrors, is that if you show a child a mirror, the one thing that they do, they smile, they want to interact. They interact in the same way that an elderly person who is, we think that they're not mentally okay, they will interact with a mirror. They will even ask the shadow in the mirror, who are you? Right. And we've been taught you cover, you don't show a child a mirror, and every time it rains or the thunder, it covers. And I'll try to bring you to the experiment. Remember, there were monkeys were put in a space, and every time they want to escape, they would pour water, cold water, on the monkey. And the one monkey wants to escape, we pour cold water. Yes. And then the monkeys started to understand that you don't escape, because once you try to escape, we pour cold water. Yes. And they removed the original monkeys. They put the 4 monkeys back. Yes. They never had to pour water on those monkeys. Yes. But the monkeys, continued. They understood that the one thing that you do not do is to escape.
Yes. Yes.
What else? What are they hiding from us? They've done it for so many years. Now we're starting to ask questions.
Sure. Okay. I'm going to let you go. Thanks very much for your call. Much appreciated. Paul Kotsky says, hi, Obs. For me, it would indeed be nice to hear more about the science work your guest is working on. And that's from Paul. Paul doesn't like this heebie-jeebie stuff. Talk to us about that, but I'm sure you've got some reflections on some of the heebie-jeebie stuff.
Well, I mean, there are a couple of things that the callers have kind of touched on that I feel are quite interesting to just mention. Like for starters, the thing about covering the mirrors, whatever. Apparently that came from back in ancient Rome. They believed that your mirror was a reflection of yourself, and so your soul was in the mirror. And so kind of when people would pass away or something, you would cover the mirror so it doesn't get trapped in the mirror or something like that.
Yes. In isiZulu, we call it uktwebula. So sometimes the story goes that those who practice zombification are able to take your soul through the process either of an optical illusion like a mirror or through something like a photograph. So an image is something to guard very, very closely, because in the wrong hands, it is believed, it can be taken and the person to whom the image belongs can then be zombified and enslaved.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like these kind of the cultures and the stories may change ever so slightly, but these ideas remain. To touch on the second point, the fact that the room looks bigger because of the fact the mirror's in it, that's actually that is actually entirely accurate. I mean, mirrors have 3 degrees of freedom. They've got your horizontal, your vertical, but they've also got a depth to them, because obviously they're reflecting a 3D room.
All right.
So apparently when you put a mirror in a room, it literally makes it look bigger. It's a legitimate phenomena for the simple fact that it looks like the room is goes into the mirror, so to speak. And so it's a physical thing. But there's many more things. But to then touch on the last question, I suppose, what my work corresponds to. So as mentioned at the beginning, I'm a MSc candidate in Wits' Structured Light Lab, studying optical physics. And in principle, what that means is that I get to play with lasers every single day. Yes, these are slightly more complicated, one might say, than your traditional handheld laser pointer that you would see in like a classroom or something like that. But the research that I'm doing currently pertains to taking the beam that would kind of come out of a laser as standard and playing around with light's properties to shape it and model it to do some interesting things and to have certain structures that can make it very useful. And to then take that beam and see how it responds to putting it through different sorts of media. So say the atmosphere, for example, the ocean, for example, or just any other sort of scattering material that you would expect. And kind of by doing that, you can almost study how it affects the light that comes into it, and come up with a way of undoing that effect such that you can send light in and it can come out the other side completely unaffected by whatever you put it into. But that's the elevator pitch, I suppose. But
there's something you spoke about, the fact that a mirror provides not only the two-dimensional picture of things. There's something about depth. One of the things that I experience whenever I go into an elevator where there's mirrors all around is the sensation or the idea that the image goes on forever.
Absolutely.
Eternally, right? Does it stop anywhere? Is there a place when it stops?
I mean, not necessarily, but because all that mirror kind of situation is doing is the light is kind of almost quote unquote infinitely reflecting back and forth between all the mirrors in that room. And so what that's doing is it's kind of giving the quote unquote illusion of depth to every single mirror that surrounds you in the elevator. And so as you see, kind of it takes a small cubical space and makes it feel a lot bigger than it ordinarily would. So actually that's why they do that sometimes in mirrors. It's because it ordinarily, not mirrors and elevators, because it takes an ordinarily small area and makes it feel bigger. So these properties of mirrors are well understood and well studied and are actively used in people's day-to-day lives and in the construction of the world around us in ways that people aren't even fully aware of, in ways that it improves lives without people even giving it much thought.
So if somebody's claustrophobic, for example, that is dealt with by
Absolutely.
the mirror in...
Yeah.
Because I'm a little bit claustrophobic and I really don't like small spaces. But when I go into a mirror, I mean into an elevator where there are mirrors, I feel a little more comfortable.
Absolutely,
because
yeah.
there's the illusion of space. But
Precisely.
the implications of that are wild, bro.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, people have used this information for years and years and years. Like even, I'm not sure if you've ever been to, say, a fun house or anything of that sort at like a carnival where they take these small rooms and such, and they'll put mirrors that distort light in very specific ways, and they'll make you feel like you're in a huge maze, for example, but
Yes.
where the actual space that you're in is not particularly big, it's not moving in any way, shape, or form. But as you make your way through these rooms that themselves are not that big, it feels like you're going through an experience that's a lot bigger and grander than you actually are. So kind of architects and like people in, say, carnivals or people who work with human beings on a daily basis are aware of the fact that people have these implicit biases when looking at reflections and such, and they use them to construct things that would shape the way that people perceive the world in a way that may not necessarily be true. And I suppose that kind of comes back to what your readers or listeners have been calling in to say, which is that as much as the mirror takes in an image and it reflects it, the way that you process that final third step, as we alluded to earlier, can be manipulated in all sorts of ways. Be it, yeah.
Paul says, do you know anything about the James Webb Space Telescope mirror? And he says, I'm just wondering, I want to go a little bit further and say, I mean, that telescope is said to be able to go into the furthest sort of outposts of space. Is it really seeing outposts of space, or is it just a reflection of our own ideas? Is it just, is it able to do that? Talk a little bit about this telescope and your thoughts about it.
So I'm actually quite well versed with the JWST, as we call it. In fact, my background is in astronomy and astrophysics, and I did a research project on this exact telescope. But to answer kind of your questions in the sequence that they were asked, the telescope itself has a big collecting dish, we'll call it that, which essentially is one big mirror, right? But it's made up of a lot of segmented hexagonal mirrors, right? Where you can kind of control each of those mirrors independently to create a bigger mirror of whatever shape you want, right? And you use that for all sorts of reasons, to focus the light that comes in to a particular location, to defocus it in other locations, etc., etc. But as to what the telescope looks at, so it is a infrared telescope, right? Which means that it looks not at the visible wavelength of light, right? But it looks at the infrared. So kind of one property of light is that it has a certain like wavelength, right? Which is just how long it is. Visible has quite a short wavelength. Infrared has a little bit of a longer wavelength, right? And the reason I mentioned the wavelength is because what happens in space is that let's say you've got the Earth in a particular location, and you've got a star at a further location from the Earth, right? There's a property of the universe which tells us that it's expanding, right? And it's the fastest expansion that's known of in the entire universe, right? So let's say that star happens to emit a beam of light towards the Earth. As that beam is traveling towards the Earth, the universe expands, meaning that it almost acts like you running on a treadmill, say, but then the treadmill starts to speed up, right? So you're traveling at one particular speed, the treadmill starts to speed up, so you kind of start to take longer strides, for example, to try and maintain that speed, and so on and so forth, right? Light's equivalent way of doing this is to increase its wavelength, right? So you can think of it as like it has a certain wavelength, and as the universe is expanding, it stretches that wavelength, right? And the reason that I mention all of this is that what the JWST is doing is it looks for this specific type of stretched out light that was sent out by stars at the beginning of the universe, basically, right? And it does exactly that. It records light that was sent about 13 or so billion years ago.
Wow.
And so in that way, it's been kind of said to be something of a time machine, right? Because it can look back at the universe not as it is currently, but as it was eons and eons ago, truly beyond anything we've ever seen before.
Sure.
Yeah.
Paul says, now this is interesting. Glad to be of service there, Paul.
Me too.
It sounds like a section in philosophy called deductive reasoning, right? Where you actually listen for the silences rather than the noises. So when you're having a conversation with somebody, especially if you are interrogating a particular point, you listen for what is not said in order for you to be able to know what is actually being said.
Absolutely.
That's what you're saying to me.
Yeah. In a manner of speaking, I suppose. Yeah. Like, as you mentioned, right? If you look out at the night sky in the visible spectrum, you'll find lots and lots of sources of different stars and so on and so forth. But then if you look for, as you mentioned, the silence, which in this case would correspond to those very long wavelength beams of light, then you pick up only those signals, right? Which come from a very, very, very long time in the past. And it's precisely that. You've listened
to the silence.
Yeah, precisely.
You've actually listened to the silence.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very interesting way of phrasing it.
So I want to understand this. So how does the mirror then do that?
So,
and I'm fascinated by the hexagon. I mean, somebody was telling me about beehives, for example, how you see the hexagon that is created by bees when they, and how when ice melts in snow countries, it takes up the shape of a hexagon. You've just spoken about the hexagon now. In my mind, the hexagon is making this repeat sort of sound. What is it about the hexagon, mirrors, and light?
So I'll describe it in terms of the JWS. Well, actually, I'll answer the first thing about, like you mentioned, why are the mirrors special in the JWST? So the reason that they're kind of special and the reason that they use the type of mirrors they use is because, as we alluded to earlier, you can kind of make, modern mirrors out of whatever metals you want to, right? So they coat their metal, their metal of choice is gold, right? And the reason they do that is because it reflects infrared light better than, say, a different type of metal, right? So that answers the type of mirror there. Yeah. The next thing with regard to the hexagons is, it's a lot simpler than you would think. The first answer is that making very big things is very hard, and the bigger you make them, the harder it is. So what people have done is the same thing they've done since the beginning of time, really, which is to steal from nature, because nature does things in a very optimal way and
very efficient. Yeah,
precisely. So what we do is we say, okay, well, one lifetime lasts approximately 100 years. Nature's had like billions to get it to this point. I think it's reasonable to assume that it's done it better than someone who's done it in a one lifetime, and so you pinch from there. So instead of making one big, call it circle, to act as, say, a mirror, you divide it into smaller circles, so to speak, right? But obviously circles, if you put one circle next to another circle and then you do that enough times, you'll notice that there'll be gaps within the circles themselves. So if you were to make a mirror like that, it would have holes in it, and that's a very bad thing to have. So what you do is you make a bunch of hexagons, because the hexagons can all fit together very nicely and they approximate the shape of like a big mirror. And what that also lets you do is you can then control each little hexagon individually to correct, say, for like so you can like correct, say, for like if a particular beam of light is coming in at an odd angle, you can adjust one tiny little part of the mirror, and so that gives you a bigger, greater control over the whole mirror. And in fact, actually, this isn't a new idea. We actually do it here in South Africa. We've got, I'm not sure if you're aware, the largest optical telescope in the Southern Hemisphere, the South African Large Telescope, very creatively named. But it is also a 20 diameter mirror, which is made up of a bunch of little hexagons, and what they do, as I mentioned, with like this control of these little segments, is they use that control to kind of correct for the fact that as light comes in from a star from space, it travels through the atmosphere and it gets distorted. So what they then do is they choose like a reference star, which they know behaves in a certain way, and they correct for the effect of the atmosphere by changing each of those individual little segments. And then that means that when you look at, say, another star, which you don't know the behavior of, you can take whatever way its light is being distorted from the atmosphere at that particular moment in time, and you can correct for it to almost see the light as it would have been had the atmosphere not been there at all.
Sure.
Yeah.
Is that what you do? Like you think about this stuff?
Well, this is what I did during my undergraduate years. Yes, and it's.
Tell me about the application, therefore, of your studies.
Of my studies.
Yeah, the practical application. So, is this going to be an academic endeavor forever, or are you going to make something, do something? What's the idea?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you from now, it's quite a difficult question to answer because, who knows what the next couple of years will look like. But I will tell you definitively that the stuff that I'm doing is directly applicable for everyone's, day in life and everything like that. Yeah. Because at the heart of what I do is to take a signal and to send it from point A to point B, right? And as I mentioned, you can do that through the air or through water, but a more applicable way that people understand that is through a fiber optic, right? So you take a beam of light, you send it in from a fiber optic at one point. By the time it reaches the other side, having traveled across the entire ocean, it will inherently have become distorted in some way, shape, or form, right?
Yeah.
But if you send in a particular beam of light with a particular shape, right? And you look at how it turns out at the end, and you use that for a whole bunch of different shapes, you can get an understanding of how that fiber optic is messing up that beam of light. So you can almost perform the inverse messing up to the beam of light that you send in, such that by the time it gets to the end of the fiber optic, it's completely correct, and it's the type of beam that you wanted originally.
I got a feeling we're going to hear a lot about you in the near future. I just got that feeling that we are going to... Vasilios is a very young man, by the way. I haven't asked him how old he is, but he's a very young guy. And I really, really think that we're going to hear a whole lot coming from you and your studies, and just the way that you think about light, mirrors, and all of those kinds of stuff. I really, really am looking forward. Any papers that you've written that we can go and look at and read?
Absolutely. If you look up my name on Google Scholar, you'll find some works there. In fact, one was published, I think, 3 or so hours ago.
Okay.
So quite an exciting day, to put it mildly. But
Vasilios Cocotos, supremely proud of you, my brother. Thank you so much for coming through. He's a master's candidate in optical physics and Wits University.